Well, what is in your tap water? There's a study called Fingerprint Your Tap Water, and it's getting some help from students right across the country who are here for the Canada-wide Science Fair. Ph.D. candidate Heather Haig sent out 500 vials to the finalists and asked them to fill them with a sample of their tap water from home. Heather's here in studio. Good morning.
Good morning, Sheila.
So why did you send out these vials to all these Science Fair students?
So there's a lot of reasons for us to send out the vials. We wanted to do a study with the students to help them out with learning a little bit about something called citizen science, which is what it sounds like, using regular citizens to do scientific work. So that was one of my key objectives. As well, I use water isotopes in my work. So I thought it'd be a really good way to teach these students about a science they're probably not exposed to in their regular everyday classrooms.
Okay, so how will the vials of water be used? What are you going to do with them?
So once we get the vials here to Saskatchewan, so we have a lot of them coming in already, the students are bringing them with them.
Because with Science Fair competitors, compliance is going to be very good, right?
Well, so far we're still waiting on the students to bring in a lot of the vials.
Okay.
But apparently today's the big day when the students know to bring in the vials. I also had a whole bunch email me and send me vials via the mail before we even got here, which was great.
Keeners.
Yeah, definite keeners. Vancouver, all of the Vancouver kids sent their vials in early.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Okay.
So once they get here, we have some specialized equipment here at the U of R that is able to measure the hydrogen isotopes and the oxygen isotopes on a thing called a cavity ring down spectrometer. So fancy words, but basically it'll tell me whether the tap water isotopes indicate that they're drinking rain or snow.
Oh, is that it? Is it simple as that? Are you drinking rain or snow?
It's pretty simple. So we already know the isotopic signatures of precipitation across the country. It's been something that's been mapped from people monitoring our rainwater and our snow. And so if I just compare the values of rain and snow to what they brought me in their tap water, then we'll be able to give them that information.
Okay. So you'll give it back to them. And in what form and how? How will that all play out?
So I want to make sure that this data is as open as possible. This is another thing that's becoming a lot more common in science, is to make sure that all data is open and transparent. So the students will, as soon as the vials are run, I'm going to keep it on a Google Doc so that the students can see it real time as we get data in, which I think is really important for them to understand how long science takes as well. So these samples only take about 9 minutes each to run, but setup and standards, et cetera, will take a little bit of time.
Why did you want to do this?
So there was a paper in the U.S. that did this, and it came out in 2007. And it's a gentleman that I've talked to a little bit and collaborated with. And this actually really helps when you're looking forward to predictions for climate. So my studies, I do a lot of water quality and climate work. And what I wanted to know was, are Canadians vulnerable to losing their tap water? So
now you've got people's attention.
Yeah, it's a big question. So if you think about Saskatchewan, for instance,
Yeah.
a lot of our groundwater from isotope studies, actually, and from hydrological studies, we know that a lot of our groundwater is snow. So if our groundwater comes from snow, and some of the future climate predictions are that we're going to have a reduced snowpack, does that make our source of tap water vulnerable? And so that's the kind of question I want to ask.
What's your theory? Do you have a hypothesis?
So this type of work, because it's on such a broad scale, I think I would have different hypotheses for different provinces and for different areas.
What about for this province?
So for this province, I think a lot of the groundwater, especially in rural areas, is from like deep old aquifers. And so those are fairly steady. But that water has been there for tens of thousands of years or thousands of years, depending on how deep you're going. So those resources are fairly stable. But, you do have shallower groundwater wells. Our water here in Regina comes from Buffalo Pound. It's a pretty sustainable source. We have a lot of water coming from Diefenbaker into Buffalo Pound. But with, less water coming down from the Rockies, how that'll change in the future is something that's really interesting for us.
Yeah. Where across Canada would you expect the greatest vulnerability?
So areas where they're using shallow groundwater, I think, would be the area that I think would be the most vulnerable. So it's really interesting because I actually had the students mark off on their data sheets whether they knew if their water was groundwater or lake water or river water, or if they didn't know. But I encouraged them to ask their parents, ask their teachers, call into city council, and try to figure out where their tap water was coming from, because most of us don't know. Here in Regina, Buffalo Pound, it's fairly
Yeah,
obvious.
yeah.
But a lot of students, if they're not on well water, they have no idea.
Yeah, so you're really getting these kids to think about the whole question of water and something we take for granted, right? That we'll have water forever.
And as Canadians, a lot of the times we've been able to take that for granted, but we've seen even here in Regina at times where they've asked us to reduce our water use.
Yeah.
And that's not uncommon.
Even in Vancouver,
Yeah.
where you think, if their water's all coming from rain. I've been out there when they've had water bans.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times that's a more of a water quality thing. But a lot of these shallow groundwater sources, I know I grew up in Southern Ontario, and we were on a shallow water well. And during drought years, this past year actually in Ontario, my parents didn't have water. And so I'm super connected to the question, and I think it's really interesting for students to start to think about that.
Well, and clearly you want to pass on your love of science too, right?
And so I think that's one of the biggest importance with Science Fair. I didn't participate in Science Fair when I was younger, but I know I would have loved it. I've had some great chats with students I was judging on Tuesday, and these kids are so excited and passing on that, scientists are just normal people. There was a hashtag a while ago. We are, we wake up in the morning, have our coffee like everybody else. So it's good for the students to get to chat, especially with young scientists, with female scientists as well. I like to advocate for that the girls can do this too.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It's still a very important message to get out there. Well, maybe you can get back in touch with us when you have some results and we can talk again.
I would love to come back and chat.
Thanks, Heather.